Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The Last Elevator Ride. Imagine checking into a hotel in one of the biggest cities in America and becoming the center of one of the most disturbing mysteries ever captured on surveillance video. A mystery so strange that even today, people still argue about what really happened. A mystery involving a missing woman, a rooftop water tank, and footage that millions would later watch in disbelief. This is the story of Eliza Lamb. Los Angeles, January 2013. 21-year-old Eliza Lamb was excited. She was intelligent, curious, and adventurous. Originally from Vancouver, Canada, she had decided to take a solo trip down the west coast of the United States. For Eliza, the journey represented freedom, an opportunity to see the world, an opportunity to discover herself. Her family wasn't worried. Eliza was responsible. She regularly updated her parents. She stayed in contact. She followed her travel plans carefully. Everything seemed normal, until she arrived in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil Hotel. The hotel Eliza chose already carried a dark reputation. For decades, the Cecil Hotel had been connected to crime, violence, suicides, and unexplained deaths. Located in downtown Los Angeles' Skid Row district, it was known as one of the city's most infamous buildings. 5. Despite its history, the hotel was inexpensive and attractive to budget travelers. Eliza checked in on January 26, 2013. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She explored the city, visited bookstores, took photographs, sent messages to friends, called home. Then things began changing. Strange behavior. Hotel staff later reported that Eliza appeared increasingly unusual. One employee claimed she left handwritten notes for other guests. Some guests reportedly complained about odd behavior. Because of this, management moved her from a shared room into a private room. Whether these reports were significant or not would later become a major point of debate. The last contact. On January 31st, Eliza contacted her family. Everything seemed normal. Then, silence. No calls. No emails. No updates. For her family, that was immediately alarming. Because Eliza never missed scheduled check-ins. Never. The missing person investigation. When Eliza failed to contact home, her parents contacted police. A search began. Officers searched the hotel. They searched hallways, guest rooms, common areas, the rooftop. Nothing. No sign of Eliza Lamb. No evidence of violence. No evidence of kidnapping. No evidence of where she had gone. She had simply vanished. The video. Then investigators discovered surveillance footage. A single elevator camera had recorded what appeared to be Eliza's final known moments. The footage would soon become one of the most famous mystery videos ever released. What the camera captured. The elevator doors opened. Eliza entered. At first she seemed normal. Then something changed. She pressed multiple buttons, waited, looked outside, stepped back in, then suddenly hid in the corner, as if avoiding someone or something. She repeatedly peered into the hallway, looked left, looked right, then stepped outside again. Her movements became increasingly strange, almost frantic. At one point she appeared to gesture towards someone unseen. Then the elevator doors finally closed, and Eliza disappeared from history. The public obsession begins. Police released the footage hoping someone would recognize her. Instead, the internet exploded. Millions watched. Millions speculated. Millions tried to explain what they were seeing. Was she frightened? Was she hiding from someone? Was another person just outside the camera's view? Had she encountered danger? Or was something else happening entirely? The search intensifies. The video generated worldwide attention. Yet investigators still couldn't find Eliza. Days passed. Then weeks. No answers. Until hotel guests started complaining. The complaints. The water tasted strange. Some guests reported unusual discoloration. Others complained of low water pressure. Maintenance workers decided to investigate. They climbed onto the roof, toward 4 large water tanks. And there, They made a discovery that would shock the world. The water tank. Inside one of the tanks, they found Eliza Lamb. The missing traveler had been dead on the hotel's rooftop the entire time, above hundreds of guests, while people drank, showered, and brushed their teeth. The question that haunts the case: how did she get there? The roof was difficult to access. The tanks were elevated. The lids were heavy. No witnesses saw her. No cameras recorded her reaching the roof. And the elevator footage only deepened the mystery. The beginning of a global mystery. Police believed they had found the missing woman. But finding Eliza's body was only the beginning, because the questions surrounding her death would become far more disturbing than her disappearance. When investigators opened the rooftop water tank, they expected answers. Instead, they uncovered one of the most debated and mysterious deaths in modern true crime history. The discovery of Eliza Lamb's body should have ended the mystery. In most missing person cases, finding the victim answers the biggest question: what happened? But in Eliza's case, the discovery created even more questions, because investigators now faced a terrifying puzzle. How had a 21-year-old tourist ended up inside a rooftop water tank? The rooftop, the Cecil Hotel roof, wasn't designed for guests. It was a restricted area. Maintenance workers used it. Guests did not. To reach the roof, a person generally needed access through secured areas of the building. At first, many people believed this meant someone must have helped Eliza get there, or forced her there. The water tanks. The tanks themselves presented another challenge. They were large, cylindrical containers positioned high above the roof surface. Maintenance workers typically accessed them using ladders. To many observers, it seemed difficult for a person to accidentally end up inside one. The media frenzy. News coverage exploded. Television stations replayed the elevator footage constantly. Online forums filled with theories. Some people believed Eliza was being followed. Others believed she was hiding from someone. Many focused on her unusual behavior in the elevator. The mystery video. Frame by frame, people analyzed every movement. Why did she step in and out of the elevator? Why did she press multiple buttons? Why did she appear to peek around corners? Why did she make unusual hand gestures? The footage became one of the most dissected surveillance videos in internet history. The search for a suspect. Police carefully examined evidence. They reviewed security footage, interviewed hotel employees, questioned guests. Yet investigators found no evidence of a known attacker. No obvious suspect emerged. The roof access question. One of the most debated issues involved access to the rooftop. Many reports claimed alarms would have sounded if someone entered certain rooftop areas. However, details about the hotel's access routes became a source of confusion and public speculation. Investigators ultimately examined how Eliza could have reached the roof through available pathways within the building. Public discussion often exaggerated or misunderstood some of the building's access restrictions. Eliza's background. As investigators dug deeper into her life, they learned something important. Eliza had openly written about mental health struggles. She had discussed periods of depression and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. These facts would later become central to the investigation. The blog posts. Before her trip, Eliza maintained an online blog. She wrote about books, travel, feelings, life experiences. Many entries reflected a thoughtful young woman trying to navigate challenges while still pursuing adventure and independence. A complicated picture. The more investigators learned, the more difficult the case became, because there were two competing possibilities. One possibility suggested criminal involvement. The other suggested a tragic medical or psychological crisis. The autopsy begins. Medical examiners now face the most important task in the investigation: determining exactly how Eliza died. The public expected shocking answers. Perhaps evidence of violence. Perhaps proof of murder. Perhaps signs that someone had placed her in the tank. What investigators found. The autopsy did not reveal evidence of major physical trauma consistent with a violent assault. There were no findings that clearly established homicide. The public reaction. Instead of ending speculation, the findings intensified it. Many people felt the case still contained unanswered questions. The elevator footage remained deeply unsettling, and the circumstances surrounding her presence inside the tank continued to feel difficult to explain. The internet takes over. Online investigators began creating elaborate theories. Some suggested conspiracy. Some suggested paranormal explanations. Some claimed the hotel itself was connected to dark secrets. Others insisted the answer was simpler. The problem with mysteries. When people encounter a mystery, they often assume there must be a complicated explanation. But investigators know something important. Sometimes reality is confusing enough on its own. The coroner's findings. As the official investigation continued, experts focused on reconstructing Eliza's final days. What happened before the elevator footage? What happened after? And what might explain her behavior? The critical question. Could someone experiencing a severe mental health episode behave in ways that seem frightening or inexplicable to outside observers? Medical experts said yes. In some situations, a person experiencing a psychiatric crisis may become confused, fearful, disoriented, or act in ways that appear unusual to observers. Yet questions remained. Even with that possibility, many people struggled to reconcile the facts. The tank, the roof, the footage. The combination felt unsettling, and that feeling helped transform the case into a global obsession. The human cost. Lost beneath the theories was a simple truth. A young woman had died far from home. A family had lost a daughter. Parents were left with grief that no explanation could erase. The case evolves. As forensic results approached completion, investigators prepared to release their conclusions. The world wanted a murderer, a conspiracy, a shocking revelation. Instead, authorities were about to present an explanation that many people would spend years debating. The rooftop water tank had revealed where Eliza Lamb was found, but the autopsy report would determine whether investigators believed they were looking at a crime or a tragedy with no criminal perpetrator at all. When the Los Angeles County coroner completed Eliza Lamb's autopsy, many people expected the mystery to end. Instead, the mystery became even bigger. Because the official findings did not match what millions of people expected. The initial examination. In the days after Eliza's body was recovered from the rooftop water tank, medical examiners conducted a full autopsy. Investigators searched for signs of violence, signs of assault, signs of a struggle, anything that would clearly indicate murder. What they didn't find. There were no major injuries pointing toward a violent attack. There was no evidence that someone had beaten her. There was no evidence that someone had stabbed her. There was no evidence that someone had shot her. The findings surprised many observers. The waiting period. Initially, the autopsy could not determine exactly what happened. Coroners delayed a final ruling while waiting for toxicology testing and additional analysis. For months, speculation grew. The internet filled the vacuum with theories. The toxicology results. When the final results arrived, they painted a complicated picture. Authorities reported that drugs and alcohol were not considered a contributing factor in Eliza's death. However, investigators found something else. Bipolar disorder. Eliza had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The coroner ultimately listed bipolar disorder as a significant contributing condition when ruling her death an accidental drowning. The official conclusion. On June 20, 2013, authorities announced their finding. Cause of death. Accidental drowning. Manner of death. Accident. No homicide ruling. No criminal determination. The official investigation concluded that foul play could not be established. The public backlash. For many people, the ruling felt unsatisfying. They had watched the elevator footage. They had seen Eliza's unusual behavior. They had heard about the rooftop water tank. An accident seemed impossible to them. The questions. If her death was accidental, how did she reach the roof? Why was she acting strangely? Why did nobody see her? Why did the elevator footage look so disturbing? The viral explosion. As news spread, the case transformed. It stopped being a local investigation. It became a worldwide phenomenon. Millions of people began conducting their own investigations online. Frame-by-frame analysis. Internet users studied every second of the elevator video. Some believed she was hiding from a person. Others believed she was speaking to someone outside the elevator. Some believed the footage had been altered. Others thought it showed a mental health crisis unfolding in real time. The hotel's reputation. The Cecil Hotel's dark history added fuel to the fire. The building had already gained notoriety through decades of crime, violence, suicides, and notorious guests. Because of that history, many people found it difficult to believe that Eliza's death could have an ordinary explanation. The competing narratives. By late 2013, two major theories had emerged. Theory 1. Eliza was the victim of foul play. Someone harmed her. Someone moved her body. Someone escaped detection. Theory 2. Eliza experienced a severe mental health episode that ultimately led to a tragic accident. Investigators increasingly leaned toward the second explanation based on the available evidence. The family's pain. Lost beneath the theories was the reality faced by Eliza's family. For them, this was not a mystery movie, not a conspiracy, not entertainment. It was the loss of a daughter who had left home for an adventure and never returned. The mystery refuses to die. Even after the official ruling, debate continued. Years passed. Documentaries were made. Books were written. Podcasts discussed the case. The elevator footage continued attracting new viewers. And every new viewer asked the same question. What really happened? The strange discovery investigators couldn't ignore. As detectives reviewed every moment of Eliza's final days, one detail kept drawing attention. Not the water tank. Not the rooftop. The elevator. Because the last confirmed footage of Eliza showed behavior that seemed deeply unusual. And if investigators could understand what was happening inside that elevator, they might finally understand what happened afterward. The autopsy gave authorities an official answer, but the surveillance footage left the world with a mystery that refused to drown alongside Eliza Lamb. The surveillance footage lasted only a few minutes. Yet more than a decade later, people are still watching it, still debating it, still trying to understand what they are seeing. For investigators, the elevator video was never meant to become famous. It was simply a missing person lead. The Lapt released the footage on February 13, 2013, hoping someone might recognize Eliza Lamb or provide information about her whereabouts. Instead, the video became one of the most analyzed pieces of surveillance footage in true crime history. The last known images. The footage shows Eliza entering an elevator at the Cecil Hotel shortly after midnight on February 1, 2013. These are the last known images of her alive. At first, nothing seems unusual. She steps into the elevator. Then she begins pressing multiple buttons, one after another, and then something strange happens. The elevator doesn't appear to move. The doors remain open. Eliza waits, looks outside, steps back, waits again. The behavior. Then her actions become increasingly unusual. She leans out into the hallway, looks left, looks right, returns inside, moves to a corner. At one point she appears to hide against the wall. Then she exits the elevator again. She gestures with her hands, moves them rapidly, appears to be reacting to something outside the camera's field of view, or perhaps to something only she could see. That uncertainty would fuel years of speculation. The internet explodes. When the footage was released, millions of people immediately began analyzing it. Frame by frame, second by second, people slowed it down, enhanced it, zoomed in. Everyone was searching for a clue, a shadow, a suspect, a hidden figure, anything that might explain what happened next. The theories begin. One group became convinced Eliza was being followed. Another believed she was hiding from someone standing outside the elevator. Others suggested she was communicating with an unseen person. More extreme theories claimed the footage showed paranormal activity. The internet produced thousands of explanations. Most had one thing in common. They assumed someone else had to be involved. What investigators saw. Detectives viewed the footage differently. To them, the video wasn't proof of murder. It was evidence, and evidence had to be interpreted carefully. Investigators noted that unusual behavior alone does not prove a crime occurred. Many factors can affect a person's actions, including fear, confusion, stress, intoxication, illness, or a mental health crisis. The video itself could not explain why Eliza was behaving the way she was. The mystery of the elevator doors. One detail especially fascinated viewers. Why didn't the elevator leave? People assumed something was wrong. Some believed another person was holding the elevator. Others thought the system was malfunctioning. But elevator experts later pointed out that certain button combinations and operational settings can cause doors to remain open longer than expected. The footage alone did not prove that someone else was controlling the elevator. The altered footage controversy. Years later, another controversy emerged. Viewers noticed irregularities in the released video. Some claimed parts appeared slowed down or edited. This discovery generated a fresh wave of theories. For conspiracy theorists, it seemed like evidence of a cover-up. For investigators, it was far less dramatic. Edited footage released to the public does not automatically mean evidence was manipulated. Law enforcement agencies sometimes alter footage before public release for technical, investigative, or privacy reasons. Still, the controversy ensured that debate around the case never faded. A disturbing possibility. As experts reviewed Eliza's medical history, another explanation gained attention. Some symptoms visible in the footage appeared consistent with a person experiencing severe psychological distress or a psychiatric episode. Individuals in such situations may feel frightened, confused, paranoid, or threatened even when no actual threat is present. That possibility would become central to the official explanation, but for many observers, it remained difficult to accept, because the footage felt so unsettling, so deliberate, so frightening. The human brain and mysteries. Psychologists later noted an interesting phenomenon. Humans are naturally uncomfortable with unexplained behavior. When we cannot immediately understand someone's actions, we often create explanations. Sometimes those explanations become more dramatic than reality itself. And no modern case demonstrated that phenomenon more clearly than Eliza Lamb's. The final moments we can see. The video ends without answers. Eliza exits the elevator, walks out of frame, and disappears. No camera captures what happened next. No witness steps forward. No recording shows how she reached the rooftop. The footage simply ends, and the mystery begins. The question detectives could never answer. The elevator video became the most famous part of the case. But detectives knew something important. The video wasn't the mystery. The mystery was everything that happened after it. Because somewhere between that elevator and the rooftop water tank, Eliza Lamb took her final steps. Millions of people believed the elevator footage contained the answer to Eliza Lamb's death. But investigators increasingly suspected it might only show the first visible signs of a tragedy already unfolding. Long before Eliza Lamb arrived in Los Angeles, the Cecil Hotel already had a reputation. And not just a bad reputation, a legendary one. By the time Eliza checked in during January 2013, the building had become one of the most infamous hotels in America. To some people, it was simply an aging downtown hotel. To others, it was a place where tragedy seemed to happen over and over again. And after Eliza's death, many people became convinced the building itself was somehow part of the mystery. The beginning. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1927. At the time, developers envisioned it as a luxurious destination for travelers visiting Los Angeles. But the Great Depression changed everything. The surrounding neighborhood declined. Crime increased. Businesses closed. Over the decades, the area around the hotel became increasingly associated with poverty, addiction, and homelessness. Eventually, the Cecil became known for inexpensive long-term stays. And with that came problems. A history of tragedy. Throughout its history, the hotel became linked to numerous deaths and suicides. Several guests died under tragic circumstances. Others took their own lives. Newspaper archives documented incident after incident over many decades. As the years passed, the building developed an almost mythological reputation. A reputation that would later influence public perception of Eliza's case. The Night Stalker connection. One of the most notorious figures associated with the Cecil Hotel was serial killer Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. During the mid-1980s, Ramirez reportedly stayed at the hotel while carrying out a series of murders across California. The connection shocked many people after it became widely known. Suddenly, the Cecil wasn't just a troubled hotel. It became linked to one of America's most feared serial killers. Another infamous guest. Years later, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also stayed at the hotel during a visit to Los Angeles. At the time, Unterweger had convinced many people that he had reformed after serving prison time. In reality, investigators later concluded he continued killing. The fact that two notorious serial killers had both stayed at the same hotel only deepened its dark reputation. Reality versus legend. As stories accumulated, the Cecil became surrounded by myths. Some stories were accurate, some were exaggerated, some were repeated so many times that separating fact from fiction became difficult. Yet one thing was undeniable. The hotel had experienced an unusually large number of tragic incidents over many decades. Eliza arrives. When Eliza checked into the hotel in January 2013, she likely had little idea how famous the building would later become. She was a traveler, a tourist, a young woman exploring a new city. There is no evidence that she chose the hotel because of its reputation. At the time, many travelers simply saw it as an affordable place to stay in downtown Los Angeles. The internet connects the dots. After Eliza's death, online investigators became fascinated by the hotel's history. Many began wondering whether the building somehow contributed to what happened. Others went much further. They suggested curses, hauntings, paranormal forces. These claims generated enormous attention online. But investigators focused on evidence rather than legends. The danger of reputation. Experienced detectives know something important. When a location develops a dark reputation, people often interpret new events through that reputation. A tragedy that might otherwise seem straightforward begins to appear mysterious. Coincidences feel meaningful. Ordinary details feel sinister. The Cecil Hotel became a perfect example of this phenomenon. The rebranding. Even before Eliza's case concluded, hotel owners were attempting to distance themselves from the building's reputation. Part of the property operated under a different name, Stay on Main, in an effort to attract travelers who might be wary of the Cecil's history. But after Eliza's death, worldwide media attention made that difficult. The hotel's name became permanently connected to one of the internet's most famous mysteries. The question nobody could ignore. Despite all the stories about the hotel, the central question remained unchanged. What happened to Eliza Lamb? Not what happened at the Cecil in 1937. Not what happened in 1964. Not what happened during the Night Stalker murders. What happened during those final days in January and February of 2013? Investigators returned to the evidence. As detectives worked through the case, they tried to strip away the myths, the legends, the rumors, the internet theories. They focused on facts, the elevator footage, the rooftop, the autopsy, the toxicology report, the witness statements, and increasingly, those facts pointed toward a conclusion that many people found uncomfortable. Because the most likely explanation did not involve a serial killer, did not involve a conspiracy, did not involve the supernatural. Instead, it pointed toward a deeply human tragedy, a different kind of mystery. The mystery wasn't necessarily who harmed Eliza. The mystery might be understanding what she was experiencing during her final hours. And that question would lead investigators directly into one of the most misunderstood aspects of the entire case. Final line. The Cecil Hotel's dark history made Eliza Lamb's death feel like part of a larger legend. But detectives increasingly believed the real answer lay not in the building's past, but inside Eliza's final state of mind. By 2013, the world had become obsessed with the mystery of Eliza Lamb. Millions had watched the elevator footage. Millions had developed theories. Millions believed someone else had to be involved. But investigators kept returning to the same question. What was Eliza experiencing during her final days? Because understanding that question might explain everything that followed. The person behind the mystery. One of the greatest tragedies of the Eliza Lamb case is that many people know the mystery, but very few know Eliza. Before she became the subject of documentaries, YouTube videos, podcasts, and internet forums, she was a real person. A daughter, a student, a traveler, a young woman trying to build a future. Friends described her as intelligent, thoughtful, creative, and deeply interested in writing. She loved books, photography, travel, and like many young adults, she was trying to understand herself and her place in the world. Her public writing. Eliza maintained an online blog where she openly discussed many aspects of her life. She wrote about personal struggles, dreams, relationships, self-image, and sometimes, her mental health. Those writings would later become important because they provided insight into what she had been dealing with long before arriving in Los Angeles. Bipolar disorder. Eliza had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a medical condition that can involve significant changes in mood, energy, activity levels, and behavior. Some people experience periods of depression. Others experience periods of mania or hypomania. In severe cases, symptoms can include confusion, impaired judgment, racing thoughts, unusual beliefs, or psychosis. Not everyone experiences the condition in the same way, and symptoms can vary dramatically from person to person. What investigators learned. As detectives reviewed medical information and the coroner's findings, they discovered evidence suggesting Eliza may not have been taking all of her prescribed medications as directed in the period leading up to her death. Reports related to the investigation noted discrepancies involving prescribed medications. This detail became highly significant, because changes in medication can sometimes contribute to the return or worsening of symptoms in people with bipolar disorder. Re-examining the elevator footage. Once investigators considered this possibility, they began looking at the famous video differently. Instead of asking, "Who is she hiding from?" they asked, "Could she believe someone was there?" That distinction mattered, because a person experiencing paranoia, fear, confusion, or a psychiatric crisis may react to perceived threats that others cannot see. To outside observers, those actions can appear mysterious or frightening. The public struggle. For many viewers, this explanation felt unsatisfying. The elevator footage was so strange, so unsettling, so dramatic. People wanted a dramatic answer. A killer, a conspiracy, a hidden figure in the hallway. But investigators are trained to follow evidence rather than instinct. And the available evidence continued pointing toward a tragic mental health crisis as a possible explanation. The human reality. Mental illness is often misunderstood in true crime discussions. People sometimes assume behavior must be either completely rational or completely irrational. Reality is rarely that simple. A person can appear normal one moment and deeply distressed the next. They can make decisions that seem impossible to understand from the outside, especially during a severe episode. The final days. Unfortunately, no one knows exactly what Eliza experienced during her last hours. No diary entry explains it. No witness can fully describe it. No recording captures every moment. The elevator footage shows only a brief glimpse, a few minutes from a much larger story. And that glimpse may never tell us everything. The tragedy of uncertainty. One reason the case continues to fascinate people is that uncertainty remains. Investigators reached conclusions based on available evidence. But because no one can fully reconstruct Eliza's thoughts or experiences, some questions will likely never be answered with absolute certainty. That uncertainty creates space for endless theories. What the evidence suggests. When detectives combined the autopsy findings, the toxicology results, her medical history, her behavior captured on video, the lack of evidence supporting homicide, a picture emerged, not of a conspiracy, not of a serial killer, but of a young woman who may have been experiencing a severe mental health crisis during the final hours of her life. The difference between mystery and evidence. The internet often focuses on what feels mysterious. Investigators focus on what can be demonstrated, and those are not always the same thing. The mystery of Eliza Lamb became famous because of unanswered questions. But detectives ultimately based their conclusions on evidence rather than speculation. The last missing piece. Even so, one question continued haunting the case. A question that neither the elevator footage nor the autopsy could completely answer. How exactly did Eliza reach the rooftop water tank? Because even if investigators understood her state of mind, they still needed to understand her final movements. And that question would become one of the most heavily debated aspects of the entire investigation. The deeper investigators looked into Eliza Lamb's life, the less the case resembled a murder mystery, and the more it resembled the story of a young woman fighting a battle that few people around her could fully see. For years, one question dominated discussions about the Eliza Lamb case. How did she get onto the roof? Not why, not who, not what happened in the elevator. Just one question. How did a 21-year-old tourist end up inside a rooftop water tank? To many people, the answer seemed impossible. And that perceived impossibility helped fuel countless theories. The discovery that shocked everyone. When maintenance worker Santiago Lopez climbed onto the roof on February 19, 2013, he was investigating guest complaints about the hotel's water supply. Guests had reported strange tasting water, unusual water pressure, discoloration. The search led him to one of the hotel's rooftop water tanks. Inside, he discovered Eliza Lamb's body. The case immediately transformed from a missing person investigation into a death investigation. The public assumption. As news spread, many people assumed the rooftop must have been inaccessible. After all, if reaching the roof was impossible, then someone else must have been involved. This idea quickly became one of the most repeated claims online. But investigators soon learned that reality was more complicated. The access routes. The Cecil Hotel had multiple ways to reach rooftop areas. Investigators examined stairways, fire escapes, maintenance access points, and other routes throughout the building. While some areas were restricted, police ultimately determined that Eliza could have reached the roof without extraordinary assistance. Various reports from the investigation indicated there were accessible routes leading to rooftop areas. The alarm controversy. One of the biggest myths involved rooftop alarms. Many people believed alarms would have automatically alerted staff if anyone entered the roof. However, details surrounding alarm systems became widely misunderstood online. The existence of security measures did not necessarily mean that reaching the roof would have been impossible under all circumstances. Investigators examined these issues during the case. The water tank problem. Even if Eliza reached the roof, another question remained. How did she enter the tank? The tanks were large industrial containers elevated above the rooftop. To many observers, climbing into one seemed difficult. And if she entered voluntarily, how could she become trapped? These questions became central to public debate. Investigators reconstruct the scene. Detectives carefully studied the tank area. They analyzed photographs, inspected access points, reviewed maintenance procedures. Their goal was to determine whether the physical evidence supported homicide, or whether accidental entry remained plausible. The challenge of reconstruction. One difficulty investigators faced was that no camera recorded Eliza's movements after the elevator footage. No witness observed her final route. No recording documented her arrival on the roof. As a result, investigators had to reconstruct events using physical evidence rather than direct observation. What was missing? In many homicide investigations, detectives find signs of a struggle. Injuries, defensive wounds, witnesses, forensic evidence. In Eliza's case, investigators did not find evidence clearly establishing an attack or forced confinement. That absence became significant, because while absence of evidence does not prove something never happened, investigators must work with what they can demonstrate. The human factor. As detectives examined possible routes to the roof, they also considered Eliza's behavior before her disappearance. If she was experiencing fear, confusion, paranoia, or disorientation, her actions might not follow patterns that seem logical to outside observers. This possibility remained consistent with the broader conclusions being considered by investigators. The internet refuses to let go. Despite official findings, online communities continued debating the rooftop mystery. Some people insisted there had to be another person involved. Others believed important evidence had been overlooked. Years later, new viewers continued discovering the case and reaching their own conclusions. The debate never truly ended. The bigger question. Detectives eventually realized something important. The rooftop was fascinating. The water tank was disturbing. But neither necessarily explained the heart of the case. Because the real question wasn't simply how Eliza reached the roof. The real question was whether the evidence supported foul play. And to answer that, investigators would have to examine every remaining piece of evidence one final time. The turning point. As the investigation entered its later stages, authorities reviewed surveillance footage, witness accounts, physical evidence, autopsy findings, toxicology results, medical history. They were preparing to answer the question that had divided the public since the beginning. Was Eliza Lamb the victim of a crime? Or was her death a tragic accident resulting from circumstances that only appeared mysterious? Final line. The journey to the roof remained unsettling and difficult to fully reconstruct. But investigators believed the answer to Eliza Lamb's death would ultimately come not from speculation, but from the total weight of the evidence. By the summer of 2013, the Eliza Lamb case had become something much bigger than a police investigation. It had become an internet phenomenon. Millions of people around the world had watched the elevator footage. Millions had studied screenshots, read articles, examined maps, compared timelines, and with every unanswered question, new theories emerged. The perfect internet mystery. The case contained all the ingredients of a modern mystery. A young woman disappears. A hotel with a dark reputation. A disturbing surveillance video. A body found in a rooftop water tank. And enough unanswered questions to keep people debating for years. It was exactly the kind of story the internet couldn't let go of. Theory number 1, murder. The most common theory was straightforward. Someone killed Eliza. Supporters of this theory believed another person must have been involved. They pointed to the elevator footage. Her unusual behavior. The rooftop. The water tank. To them, the circumstances seemed too strange to be accidental. The problem was that investigators never uncovered evidence clearly identifying a suspect or demonstrating homicide. The official investigation ultimately ruled the death accidental. Theory number 2, a hidden pursuer. Another popular theory focused on the elevator video. Many viewers became convinced Eliza was reacting to a person standing just outside the camera's view. They believed she was hiding, watching, trying to avoid someone. The footage certainly looked unsettling, but investigators could not confirm the presence of an unseen pursuer from the video itself. Theory number 3, paranormal activity. As the case spread online, supernatural explanations appeared. Some people claimed the Cecil Hotel was haunted. Others believed Eliza encountered something paranormal. The hotel's long history of tragedy only fueled these claims. But no evidence from the investigation supported supernatural explanations. Theory number 4, government conspiracies. The internet's most elaborate theories often involved conspiracies. Some claimed Eliza discovered classified information. Others suggested government involvement. Still others attempted to connect her death to unrelated events occurring elsewhere in the world. These theories generated attention online but were not supported by evidence uncovered during the investigation. Theory number 5, the tuberculosis coincidence. One of the strangest theories involved the tuberculosis test. Internet users noticed similarities between Eliza Lamb's name and a laboratory test associated with tuberculosis. From this coincidence, some theorists developed elaborate narratives connecting her death to disease outbreaks and cover-ups. The connection was coincidental and not supported by investigators. Yet the theory spread widely online. Why these theories flourished? Psychologists often note that people dislike uncertainty. When a mystery lacks a clear, emotionally satisfying explanation, the human brain naturally searches for patterns. Sometimes those patterns are real. Sometimes they are not. The Eliza Lamb case became a powerful example of this phenomenon. The role of social media. The case unfolded during a period when social media platforms were becoming increasingly influential. Videos could spread globally within hours. Forums allowed thousands of amateur investigators to collaborate. The elevator footage became endlessly shareable. Every new viewer brought a new interpretation. Every interpretation created another theory. The human cost of speculation. One unfortunate consequence of internet investigations is that innocent people sometimes become targets. In Eliza's case, various individuals were falsely linked to the mystery by online communities. People who had no involvement found themselves accused, harassed, or discussed publicly without evidence. This became a cautionary example of how online speculation can affect real lives. The documentary era. Years later, documentaries and podcasts revisited the case. Some focused on the investigation. Others examined the internet's reaction itself. Because by then, the story wasn't only about Eliza Lamb. It was also about how modern society processes mysteries, how information spreads, how theories evolve, and how unanswered questions can become global obsessions. The investigator's perspective. While theories multiplied online, detectives remained focused on evidence. They reviewed witness statements, medical findings, physical evidence, surveillance footage, and although some questions could never be answered with complete certainty, investigators believed the overall picture pointed in a specific direction. Not toward a hidden killer, not toward a conspiracy, but toward a tragic series of events involving a vulnerable young woman in distress. The mystery that endures. Even today, the Eliza Lamb case continues attracting attention. New generations discover the elevator footage. New theories appear. new debates begin. Yet the core facts of the case remain unchanged. And those facts would ultimately shape the official conclusion, the final investigation. After months of analysis, authorities reached their decision. A decision that many accepted, and many others continued to question, because the final ruling would become one of the most controversial conclusions in modern true crime history. Final line. The internet created hundreds of explanations for Eliza Lamb's death, but investigators believed the truth was likely far less sensational and far more tragic. By the middle of 2013, investigators had spent months examining every available piece of evidence. The elevator footage, the rooftop, the water tank, the autopsy, the toxicology results, the witness statements. The world waited for a final answer. Many expected a dramatic revelation, a suspect, a confession, a hidden piece of evidence. Instead, authorities arrived at a conclusion that would spark debate for years to come. The coroner's decision. After completing the investigation, the Los Angeles County coroner officially ruled Eliza Lamb's death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. The ruling did not classify the death as a homicide. It did not identify a killer. It did not support claims of conspiracy or foul play. Instead, investigators concluded that the available evidence most strongly supported a tragic accident. Why authorities reached this conclusion? Investigators looked at the entire body of evidence rather than any single detail. They considered Eliza's documented history of bipolar disorder, reports suggesting issues with medication adherence, her unusual behavior captured on surveillance footage, the lack of evidence clearly indicating an assault, the absence of a known suspect, the autopsy findings. Taken together, authorities believed these factors pointed toward an accidental death rather than murder. The questions that remained. However, an official conclusion does not always eliminate uncertainty. Even after the ruling, many people continued asking difficult questions. How exactly did Eliza reach the roof? What was she thinking during her final hours? What was happening in the elevator? Why did the entire sequence of events feel so unsettling? Some of those questions may never be answered completely. The difference between unanswered and unsolved. One of the most important lessons from the Eliza Lamb case is that a case can contain unanswered questions without being officially unsolved. Investigators are often required to reach conclusions based on the best available evidence. That does not mean every detail becomes known. In many real-life investigations, some uncertainty remains. The Eliza Lamb case became famous precisely because those uncertainties were so visible. Public reaction. The official ruling divided public opinion. Some people accepted the investigators' conclusions. Others remained convinced that something had been missed. The elevator footage continued to fuel doubt. For many viewers, it remained difficult to reconcile what they saw on screen with the official explanation. The lasting impact. As years passed, the case evolved into one of the most discussed mysteries of the internet era. It appeared in documentaries, podcasts, television specials, books, YouTube investigations. Millions of people who had never heard of Eliza during her lifetime became familiar with her story after her death. What detectives often say. Experienced investigators sometimes repeat a simple idea. A mystery is not evidence. Something can feel mysterious without requiring a criminal explanation. The challenge is separating emotion from proof. That distinction sat at the center of the Eliza Lamb investigation. The family's perspective. Amid the theories, speculation, and worldwide attention, one reality remained constant. A family lost their daughter. No theory could change that. No investigation could reverse it. No answer, however detailed, could fully erase that loss. The case becomes a modern legend. Over time, Eliza Lamb's story became something unusual. Part true crime case, part internet mystery, part cultural phenomenon. Few cases have generated such a powerful combination of evidence, uncertainty, emotion, and speculation. And that is one reason people continue discussing it more than a decade later. The final question. Yet one question remained. Not about evidence. Not about the roof. Not about the elevator. A bigger question. Why did this case capture the world's imagination in a way so few others ever have? Because the answer to that question may explain why Eliza Lamb's story continues to endure long after the investigation ended. The official investigation closed the case with a ruling of accidental drowning, but the debate surrounding Eliza Lamb's death was only beginning. More than a decade has passed since Eliza Lamb disappeared inside the Cecil Hotel. The investigation ended. The coroner issued a ruling. The evidence was collected. The files were closed. Yet the story refuses to disappear. Every year, millions of people continue to discover the case for the first time. They watch the elevator footage, read the articles, study the timeline, and eventually ask the same question. What really happened? More than a mystery. Most true crime cases eventually fade from public attention. The Eliza Lamb case did not. Because it was never just a crime story. It became something larger. A story about uncertainty. A story about perception. A story about how humans respond when faced with unanswered questions. The elevator footage. No single piece of evidence contributed more to the case's longevity than the elevator video. Most investigations are hidden from public view. Witness interviews happen behind closed doors. Evidence remains inside police files. But millions of people watched Eliza's final known moments. That created a powerful emotional connection. People felt as though they were witnessing something important. Something they should be able to understand. Yet many couldn't. And that frustration kept the mystery alive. The Internet age. The Eliza Lamb case emerged at exactly the right moment in Internet history. Social media was expanding rapidly. Online communities were growing. People could collaborate across continents. A mystery no longer belonged only to investigators. It belonged to everyone, for better and for worse. The rise of amateur detectives. Thousands of people attempted to solve the case themselves. Some approached it carefully, others jumped to conclusions. Many became convinced they had discovered hidden clues. But the case also revealed the dangers of online investigations. At times, innocent individuals became the targets of accusations based on speculation rather than evidence. It became a reminder that real investigations require more than theories. They require proof. Mental health and misunderstanding. Perhaps the most important lesson from the case involves mental health. For many viewers, the elevator footage appeared terrifying. Some immediately assumed a hidden threat. Yet mental health experts pointed out another possibility. A person experiencing a psychiatric crisis may behave in ways that seem frightening or inexplicable to observers. That reality is often misunderstood, and the Eliza Lamb case brought those misunderstandings into public view. The human being behind the headlines. Lost beneath years of debate is the person at the center of the story. Eliza was not a mystery. She was a young woman, a daughter, a student, a traveler, a writer, someone with dreams, fears, ambitions, and struggles. The world often remembers the elevator footage, but her family remembers a person, and that difference matters. What we know. After years of analysis, several facts remain clear. Eliza disappeared while staying at the Cecil Hotel. She was later found in a rooftop water tank. Authorities ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Investigators did not establish evidence supporting homicide. Those are the conclusions reached through the official investigation. What we don't know. At the same time, uncertainty remains. We do not know every thought Eliza experienced during her final hours. We do not know every step she took after leaving the elevator. We do not know exactly what she saw, felt, feared, or believed in those moments. Some mysteries are simply too personal to reconstruct completely. Why we remember. The reason people continue returning to this case may have less to do with crime and more to do with ourselves. Humans crave explanations. We want events to make sense. We want stories to have endings. We want every question to have an answer. The Eliza Lamb case reminds us that reality doesn't always cooperate. Sometimes evidence provides a conclusion, but not complete certainty. And for many people, that uncertainty is unforgettable. The legacy. Today, Eliza Lamb's story remains one of the most discussed cases of the modern Internet era. It is studied by true crime enthusiasts, discussed by psychologists, analyzed by investigators, debated by millions of strangers online. Yet beneath all the analysis lies a simple truth. A young woman went on a journey. She never returned home. And the people who loved her were left to carry that loss. Perhaps the most respectful way to remember Eliza Lamb is not as a puzzle to be solved endlessly, but as a person whose life was larger than the mystery that followed her death. Because long after the theories fade, long after the debates end, long after the internet moves on, the most important fact remains unchanged. Eliza Lamb was real, and she deserved to be remembered as more than a mystery.